Hello, I wanted to talk today about the idea of the universal basic income. Money for all, helicopter money. I am Martin Thompson and this is Alphatucana. On this channel I do talks like this about stuff that's interesting to me. I don't know, politics, current affairs, science, whatever I think of really. I do gaming videos and games like Civilization, things like that, and I do sightseeing videos. I live in London, I go on holidays occasionally, so some of the videos are good, so there you go. Right, but this one, I'm talking about the universal basic income. The idea is that with increasing automation, and anyway with the high productivity that we have, people shouldn't be working such long hours, and probably a lot of people shouldn't be working at all, and yet we want to be able to support people. And if people are not working, they may be able to do something more creative and better for society with their time than just produce goods, and even to provide services which perhaps before long will be better provided by machines anyway. So people are looking at, and have been on and off for a long time, certainly throughout my lifetime. President Nixon considered it, but I think it was voted down. And that was back in, what, the 60s or something? I don't know. 70s probably. So the idea is everybody is given enough money to live on. Suppose in this country everybody is given £20,000 a year, say. And it simplifies your bureaucracy, it simplifies your social welfare system a lot. There will be a few people, disabled people and so on, who will need more than that, but beyond certain special cases, which probably will be fairly limited, everybody can be given enough to live on. Those people will need more because they'll need special facilities, carers, special equipment and so on, but I think we understand that. For most people, say if we were given a flat £20,000, we could then go to work and earn more if we wanted to. We'd still get a 20,000 and the employer would pay us the difference. So if I'm on a 30,000 a year job, say, my employer would end up paying me 10,000 and I'd get 20,000 of helicopter money. That's Milton Friedman called it when he introduced the idea, or talked about it anyway. It is a serious proposal for economies. It's not just fairyland. And I want to talk about it a bit and look at some of the problems that are likely to arise, and maybe think a bit about how we can get around them, if we can even. If we can't and jobs are robotised or automated, then the alternative would appear to be starvation for a large number of the population, a large amount of population. So I don't think that's going to wash very well in the West, unless they nuke us or something to get rid of us, when we're no longer needed. You see, it's an issue that somewhere between 30 and 50% of all jobs can probably be automated within the next 20 years, and quite a lot within the next 5 to 10 years. My job on an IT technical help desk, for example, is one of those up for grabs by robots. Because although it uses quite a lot of human ingenuity to solve some of the more complex problems, at least 80% of the things are things which really the computer should be able to fix for itself, because they happen all the time. You know, Outlook crashes, or some add-in has failed, or something of this sort. Windows crashes, the computer hard drive is failing. These are things which don't need any special skill really to fix. You just have to know what to do. And in the case of a hard drive, you need some physical access to the machine and a robot to do it, perhaps, so maybe you'll need humans for those things. But for now. But for things like software crashes and stuff like that, really the computer should be able to get around these things by itself. And before long, 80% of the work that I do will probably be automated or built into the operating system in some way, so that it will clean up its own junk and fix things for itself. At the moment, the computers ask people too many stupid questions, which obviously people don't know how to answer. In fact, most people don't even bother to read the question, they just click get out of the way so they can get on with their work. Before long, the computers will know not to ask these stupid questions and just do the sensible thing. Hopefully. And indeed, not only will they do the repair person's job, they'll probably do the bureaucrat's job who's sitting in front of the computer in the first place when it crashed. Anyway, so how are these people going to survive? How are we going to survive? And the idea is that the state, the country, is making plenty of money and will still be producing. So people need to be supported. If they're not going to be needed for the work, they'll need to be supported anyway, just for ethical reasons, if you like. And a universal basic income is the idea. As an example, Iran, of all countries, has been sharing out its oil money with the population. And initially they shared it out with everybody. But obviously oil prices have been fluctuating downwards, and they've had to cut back. So initially they asked, I think, the 7 million richest people if they would please opt out. Or they asked the richest, wealthiest to opt out, and about 7 million people chose to opt out from receiving it. Obviously the very rich people don't need it. They're having to cut back more now, and they've had to cut out I think the 24 million richest people now in order to be able to fund it, as prices have fallen so much. But still, it's windfall money for the poorest, and it's helpful. It's good for the economy as well, because those people can spend that money on goods which the wealthy people are making. So money circulates, and that's how an economy works, is circulating money is what makes it work. A bit like electricity works by circulating in a circuit. It's kind of weird the way these things work, but that's what happens. Alaska has the rudiments of what might become a full universal basic income one day. They have what's it called? An Alaska Permanent Fund. The oil revenues that come in from that state, some of it's taken by the government directly and used, but some is invested in the Alaska Permanent Fund, which is invested, basically. It's invested for maximum prudent return. In other words, they largely invest in government bonds. In other words, the governments borrow money from the fund and pay it back at interest. I hope they haven't loaned too much to Greece. And at the moment it's paying out about $1,000 to $2,000 per year per Alaskan citizen. You're entitled to it if you've been living in the state for, I can't remember now, is it 6 years or something like that? They were trying to make it so that you had to remain in the state, but that was contrary to the Constitution, because obviously in the USA you have a free movement of people rules, and you couldn't then force people to stay in your state, or oblige them to, in order to qualify. So nevertheless, the way it works, exactly, I don't know the technicalities, but basically people who live normally in Alaska get this windfall every year. And again, it helps. There's quite a bit of unemployment, and it helps the poorest. And this is regardless of any other income that people may get. Now, as the fund grows, of course, it could gradually grow to pay enough for someone to live on for a whole year. And this would be the idea of the universal basic income. Some countries are developing sovereign wealth funds. The Arabian countries like Iran and others do have them. And they seem like a good idea. Poor old Britain, though. What have we done with our oil money? Had we invested it in a sovereign wealth fund, it would now be the biggest wealth fund in the world. Sadly, we took the oil money, we took the privatisation money from when the governments were selling off government services to private industry, like the power industry, the telecoms industry and so on. They were sold off. They were once nationalised. They took the windfall from the 3G mobile network bandwidth sales, and instead of investing it in business or in the future of the country, they used it to keep taxes down and to increase spending. In other words, they squandered it. So Britain doesn't have a sovereign wealth fund. And the resources, the products or the industries which are or were owned by the people have given the people a temporary return only instead of a permanent return. That's kind of the way not to do it. But maybe it was essential at the time, or maybe just nobody had the idea. I don't know. There are considered to be some benefits of doing this, obviously, for the individuals and for the country as a whole. For the country as a whole, people would be able to spend more time on creative pursuits, and they would come up with better product ideas. New companies would start up. A lot of small businesses would start off, but we would perhaps go back to some sort of capitalist system rather than the corporatist system we have at the moment. There would be a lot more scope for artistic endeavours and charity work and things of this sort, because people's time wouldn't be wasted doing jobs which can be done by machines. So I mean, a lot of people will just sit around and do nothing and watch TV, but then you need consumers too in our kind of system. Maybe the system has to change a lot more, I'm not sure, but if we're going to do the minimum necessary, then we keep the system and we just juggle things around a bit and see how it adapts. Obviously, one benefit of just getting a standard income instead of having to qualify for unemployment benefit and housing benefit and so on is that you are no longer at the beck and call of some faceless and sometimes malign bureaucracy, and even fickle bureaucracy as well. People on benefits have a tendency to get into debt because the benefits are not enough, and they're often withdrawn arbitrarily or mistakenly, or you fill out the form but you don't use the right form of words, and therefore you don't qualify for like months and months until it's sorted out, and in the meantime you still have to pay your bills, so you borrow money, and so it goes on. It's just terrible, right? And anyway, you might have to deal with some nasty person at the desk who's got out of bed the wrong side this morning and who just doesn't like your face and decides to screw you over. This happens more in some places than others, but there would be none of that. If you're a citizen, you just get it, and that would be that. It's argued that it would be cheaper to run. It's probably questionable. It might be. There would certainly be savings in some areas. There might even be less crime, for example, because people have money and they can buy goods. So why risk stealing them? I mean, some people are just stupid and will do it anyway, of course, but there's no hope for some people. Another freedom is of course you would have the freedom to do what you like within reason with your life. It's kind of the same thing. You could develop new products, you could have creative pursuits, you could exercise, you could keep fit, you could indulge in social media, you could run a YouTube channel, whatever you want, right? You'd have the time to do it. You can develop your own talents, you could even just idle if that's what you want. Or maybe you've got some undiagnosed depression or some other condition and nobody will listen to you, but you can relax for a couple of years and actually get over it and then be a properly contributory member of society again. If at the moment you have to be a wage slave all the time, you just never get the health back. You never get the time, you never really work on it. I think a lot of productivity is wasted these days anyway. And another freedom, a very important one, is you have freedom to say no to the resource owners. You can say no to the government bureaucrats. You can say no to the landlords. You can say no to the employers. Because you have money, you can just go somewhere else. Okay. You perhaps couldn't leave the country without losing your income, but another country might have such an income as well once you became a citizen. And if you live prudently, you could save up perhaps to get around that little obstacle. Basically, if you have a guaranteed income, you are your own master again. For most people, we are wage slaves. We go to work, for example, or if we're unemployed, we go to the bureaucrats, and you have to say the right things. If you don't like something, you have to keep your mouth shut, because if you talk too much, you're out the door. Or if you say the wrong thing to the bureaucrats, you don't get your benefits, right? A lot of companies would be far, far more efficient if they actually used their employees' brains and talents. But, of course, the bosses and the hierarchy kind of assume that the people on top have to lead. Companies are not usually flat in their management style. They are hierarchical, they are autocracies, they are anti-democratic. That would probably have to change, because people would be able to not put up with it. So it could be very, very good for society, because companies run in a flat way would probably actually be far more efficient in the long run. It may be harder for them to get competitive in the short run, so they might have to arbitrarily have some hierarchy for a time, like cooperatives often don't do that well, but that's often because they're run by total amateurs. Same with charities as well. Run by smart people, they could do very well, even with a flat hierarchy. There is no hierarchy. So that's the idea, but of course one immediately thinks of some problems. Okay, a lot of jobs are going to disappear through automation, but what about those jobs that can't be automated? What about the low-paid jobs, for example? If I'm getting £20,000 a year basic income, why am I going to go and work in a pizza shop for £20,000 a year or less? I won't. Because obviously the employers are going to be taxed more to pay for all this, and income tax will have to go up too. Quite a lot, probably. And if my wage at the pizza shop was £20,000 a year, and now I'm being given £20,000 a year, why should I work? I'm not going to make £40,000 by keeping that money and going to the pizza shop. The pizza shop owner is going to pay me less. Probably these low-paid jobs they might pay you £5,000 maybe, and you'll get 20 from the state or the welfare fund or whatever it is, plus maybe £5,000 for a low-paid job. But a lot of people are going to think, why should I give up all of my time, every hour God gave me, if you like, to work for effectively £5 grand a year? I'm better off staying home and doing my own thing. So there will be inflation, because employers would have to pay considerably more. They'd have to pay at least 10k, I would have thought. And even then they might have a job finding people. They could get immigrants, because there would be a huge influx of immigrants, which some people would see as a problem. But immigrants wouldn't be entitled to the welfare fund. They could do the jobs. Okay, so maybe that's one way. But they could only do the jobs for maybe 5 or 6 years until they qualify as citizens and get their free bonus, right? Or maybe there'd be some rule they'd only be allowed into work if they guaranteed they were going to leave again. There'd have to be some rules about how a person could decide to stay and how they could leave. There are rules at the moment. They'd probably have to be looked at and managed effectively, because otherwise the population would just inflate as well, too much. As it is, it has been calculated that I think for the United States and for Ireland, income tax would have to rise with such a system to somewhere between 40 and 46% to finance it, at least at first. Now, so there we are, my £20,000 job, say, I'm speaking hypothetically, they're now offering me £5 grand, but I'm going to lose half of that £5 grand in tax, so call it 2.5 or 3 grand, maybe I'll take home, for a year's work. It's ridiculous. Or maybe they'll offer 10 grand and I'll take home maybe 5 or 6 grand for a year's work. In a year I could do so much with my spare time. Even if it's just read a load of books and catch up on some of the classics that I've missed. You know, I could binge watch Netflix, for goodness sake. You know, catch up on all the series I've missed. I could, in other words, I could develop my culture and do lots of other things that I've mentioned. So the inevitable outcome of it would be that the number of people in work would drop, because a lot of people would quit their jobs. So the number of people actually dependent on the system and producing money to go into the system would drop. And it's probably also inflationary, because taxes would go up, income tax would go up, corporation tax would have to go up, VAT, that is sales tax, would have to go up. And therefore the amount paid to people the following year would probably have to go up to account for the inflation. So the financing of it, let's just say it looks very, very tricky because of human nature, if nothing else. Why would I want to work for a pittance? Maybe it can be introduced gradually with sovereign wealth funds, just gradually increasing and just see how it pans out. That would be a better way to do it than to do it suddenly if it's not thought out. Because when people introduce things, being humans, we don't think things through properly. Or we don't listen to the objections and the problems, we just go ahead anyway. But it could be disastrous. It would really have to be planned carefully or introduced gradually and adapted as it develops. And I think that's probably the way forward. I think it's probably going to happen gradually. Simply because the state can't afford to give people benefits with the current system if it goes on with automation increasing rapidly. Something will have to change. The current system is very expensive to run and very wasteful. A much simplified system would probably have to be done, but quite how it will work, we'll have to wait and see. Now I mentioned Iran's system, which is dependent on oil revenues. So the way they're funding their system hasn't really worked. You can't fund it based on a fickle resource. It has to be something a bit more solid. Some people have suggested simply printing money to cover it, but that's crazy. Obviously, that means inflation and debt and crashes in the economy every now and then. But somebody's going to do it. Women. There'll be a special impact on women compared with men. On the one hand, more women will be financially independent than they are at the moment. But on the other hand, you could say it would encourage more women to stay at home while the men still go out to work. So it would like wind the clock back from women's point of view. Socially, it's probably likely that more women than men would choose to stay at home, especially after having children. And they could bring up their children better, which would be a benefit, but they would then potentially become isolated from the status high world of work. Perhaps the way around that is not to regard the world of work as having a high status. But I don't think we can choose very easily where we apply status. So there is a danger of women voluntarily going back to being second-class citizens. I mean, they'll stay home, perhaps more than men do, and as a result, the old attitudes will tend to reassert themselves just naturally. And that might be, if that happens, that would probably be a bad thing. On the other hand, it would take a lot of people out of the workforce, and that would probably be a good thing, because so much automation happening, those who do want to work would have better opportunity to do so. As it was in the old days, a single breadwinner could support the whole family. Whereas nowadays, when women came into the workforce, it didn't mean more money for all, that was just inflated away. Inflation happened, of course. And so now both people have to work. And we're no better off, actually, except, in fact, we're worse off, because now two people are working where one was before, for effectively the same. Another way is, instead of gradually introducing the welfare fund, or as well as, we could gradually reduce the working week, which would mop up some of the unemployed in that way. There is a movement for a 21-hour week. If I can find it somewhere, I'll put a link to it. That's going too far, at least at the moment. But we could gradually make it compulsory to have like a 35-hour week, then a 30-hour week, and so on, gradually reduce it. At the moment, many employers get their staff to sign away their rights under the European employment laws in Europe, because they have the right to do so. So they do. So people are working 40, 46-hour weeks, whatever, because they've signed away their rights. Those contracts are not fair, of course, because you either sign the contract or you don't get the job. That's a contract signed under duress is not a fair contract. So this is where state legislation can level the playing field. It's natural in the world that people in a position of power will naturally use it. This is just human nature, it's animal nature. So employers use their leverage and force people to work longer hours. If the playing field was levelled, they would have to pay an overtime rate for those extra hours at the very minimum. And maybe even they wouldn't be allowed to work those hours. They have stricter laws in France, for example. I don't know, do you think a universal basic income would work? How could it be introduced so as not to bankrupt the economy and not to make so many people leave work at the lower end that the whole system becomes untenable? Because I wouldn't want to work for a year for another 5 or 10k, especially if half of it is taxed. Could it work? What do you think? Would you like it? I think I would like it if it could be made to work. What would you do if you had the universal basic income? What would you do with your time? Would you just go to work and earn more? Or would you develop some project of your own? What would you do? Okay. Bye for now.